Okay, today we're going to learn about clouds. Numerous things that we need to know about them. Before we start on the specifics of cloud, we need to know how clouds form. So first, what are clouds? Clouds are made of little drops of water or ice that are small enough that they can be suspended in the air, which means they don't fall to the ground. So how do they get there? They get there in two ways, from evaporation and condensation. Now, we've talked about this before in this class, and so to review again, evaporation, we've got heat coming in from our friend the sun here, and it comes down to the surface, and it heats up the surface, and it causes air to rise. And when air rises, it cools, and then it condenses, and this condensation forms clouds, and then those clouds, and that's how we get clouds, okay? But we've got to have warm air rising, and then it has to cool, because when it cools, then you get condensation. And so that is the process of how clouds form. Now, what we need to talk about next is exactly how does warm air rise, because it's made to rise in three different ways, and then that's going to lead to the formation of clouds. So we have to have an understanding of what exactly causes that. So that's what we're going to look at next, is how clouds form, or excuse me, how warm air rises, which forms clouds. There's three different ways. We have air coming together at the surface, and the way that we have air coming together at the surface is at areas of high pressure. Okay, so if you've ever looked at a weather map and you've seen one of these H's on the weather map, what we've got is air moving together in these areas, like so. And then the air is moving together at that high pressure, and it can't go down into the ground. So what happens is it rises, and when it rises, you get cloud formation. So that's air coming together. The second way that this can happen is topography. Now, topography is land formations. We have one right here that causes problems with air movement. And yes, those are the mountains, okay? And so air is moving along the ground like this, and it runs into the mountains. It's pushed upward, where it cools, condenses, and forms clouds. So that's how topography can cause it to happen. This is the first one right here. This is the second one right here. And then the third one is fronts, and you looked at that in an assignment that you did last week on weather fronts. We have cold fronts, and we have warm fronts. And if you have cold air like this in a front, this is cool air, okay? And it's moving this way, and it moves into a mass of warm air. Well, all you have to think about is which is less dense. Yes, it's the warm air. You're right. So the warm air will rise above the cool air, and there will be condensation and clouds forming. So these are the three different ways that air is forced up into the atmosphere where it cools and clouds form. Okay, so let's talk specifically about clouds then. How do we tell one cloud from another? You guys have been going outside and doing weather observations, and you've had to try and do that every day and use all these confusing names. And today what we want to talk about is how exactly you tell them apart. So there are three factors that we use to determine them. One is the shape of the cloud. The second is the altitude. And the third is whether or not it is producing precipitation, rain or snow or hail or something like that. Now, it's important to know this because if it is producing precipitation, then it's going to have this in its name, nimbo. So it will be a nimbostratus cloud or a cumulonimbus cloud. If it's not producing precipitation, then you will not use this. But if it is, then it's got to have that in the name. So let's look specifically at basically the three cloud shapes and the different elevations so we can understand about how that works. The first thing is the shape. So a cumulus cloud, you can see a cumulus cloud pictured right here in this picture. These are puffy clouds. They're shaped like cotton balls. They're puffy clouds, okay? And then the next type that we have here is what's called a stratus cloud. Now, stratus clouds, we've seen several of these. We do our weather observations, and they're flat, they're layered, and they cover generally the whole sky. And then the third type is a cirrus cloud. These are wispy or feathery. They're very thin, and they're very high elevation clouds. Cirrus clouds do not happen at low elevation. We're not going to see them below the mountains or even touching the mountains here in Polson. So the first way you identify clouds is by their shape. So if it's a puffy cloud, it's a cumulus cloud. If it's a layered cloud covering the whole sky, it's a stratus. And if it's a thin and wispy cloud, it's a cirrus. So that's strictly based on shape. The next is their elevation. If it is a high elevation cloud, it's going to have cirro in the name. High elevation equals cirro. So a cirrostratus, a cirrocumulus, those are high elevation clouds when you put the prefix cirro in front of one of these other names. Now, a middle elevation cloud is going to be an alto. Okay, same thing. We can have an alto stratus and an alto cumulus. We will not have an alto cirrus, okay, because we can't have a cirrus cloud at middle elevation. And then low elevation clouds just have the name of the cloud. So like a cumulus or a stratus cloud. That would imply that it's at low elevation. Now, how can we go outside and tell it's at low elevation? If it's at low elevation stratus clouds, we're not going to see the mountains. If they're middle elevation clouds, then we're going to see them touching probably the mountains. And if they're high, they're not going to touch the mountains. They're going to be way above that. And then the other type of cloud is like a cumulonimbus cloud. And those are those tall anvil-shaped, and anvil, if you don't know what that is, if you've watched any of those Roadrunner cartoons where the Roadrunner is always is tricking the coyote and dropping a heavy metal object on his head, that's an anvil. So if you have huge, tall clouds like that, they can go through multiple elevations. A cumulonimbus cloud is a thunderstorm cloud. So those are ones that are kind of the exceptions. But when you look at the different types of clouds, the first thing you want to figure out is the shape of the cloud and the elevation of the cloud to determine the name. And then always, always, always remembering if it is producing precipitation, it is a nimbostratus cloud. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm done.